God bless you all, and welcome to this webinar on combating global anti-Semitism. We are very honored to have with us a former special envoy combating anti-Semitism from the State Department, dear friend of ours, Elan Carr. I just wanted to kind of set the groundwork of why this is so important. Many of you are joining from throughout the United States, and some from our organization. This is being hosted by the Latino Coalition for Israel, some of our board members and others from Latin America. In the last several years, we have seen a very disturbing trend of global rise of anti-Semitism, but also here in the United States. There's been rampant anti-Israel and anti-Semitic actions for years in our campuses, but now we're seeing it actually spread in U.S. cities. As you all are aware, 2018, the anti-Semitic shooter that killed 11 people in Pittsburgh synagogue, deadliest anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. The anti-Semitic shooter at the Chabad synagogue that killed one worshiper, injured three. Now, in New York and other places, certain Jews are afraid to go into certain areas in U.S. cities, afraid to wear kippahs, to be identified as being Jewish. And this is a real crisis. Also, there are groups that have been saying that even the coronavirus was caused by the Jews, which is so striking to what we used to hear in Germany. And then New York Mayor de Blasio and the governor targeting New York synagogues, where they had to take it to court all the way up to the Supreme Court. And one of the most tragic thing is seeing U.S. Congresswoman Elan S stating that Israel has hypnotized the world, that the members of Congress that support Israel were purchased and paid by Jewish lobbies, etc. And anti-Semitism has no place in America, especially in the halls of Congress. And the most troubling part was that there was no accountability by the Congress or by her party. Jonathan Greenblatt, the chief executive of the Anti-Defamation League, said, "It appears that these kinds of anti-Semitic actions are now the new normal." According to him, it seems as though we're living in the eve of World War II before the Holocaust. Dimensions are enormous and incomprehensible. We as evangelicals have been called as Esthers for this time, as an Esther church. And it is so important. We're about a week away from the Feast of Purim. Next week, we're celebrating Purim, where Haman rose with his anti-Semitic actions to try to annihilate the Jewish people. And unfortunately, there are Hamans that are rising in the United States and throughout the world today. And clearly, God has brought us to the kingdom as Esther, as Mordecai, for such a time as this. And we want to deliver a message to our Jewish brothers in the face of this new wave of anti-Semitism, that bigotry and evil cannot stand, and that we stand unequivocally behind Israel and the Jewish people. At this time, it's a great honor to have with us Elan Carr. Elan was appointed by President Trump and by the Secretary of State to the office of U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. In that capacity, Mr. Carr served as a senior diplomatic representative of the United States, senior advisor to Secretary Pompeo on the subject of anti-Semitism. He directed U.S. policy and programs aimed at combating it. During his 2-year tenure in office, he negotiated groundbreaking agreements with foreign governments, convened the first ever U.S. government-sponsored conference on combating online Israel discrimination and campus anti-Semitism. We are so honored to have not only a great man that represented the Jewish people in our nation and globally, but a dear friend of ours. Elan, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you. Pastor Bramnick, you know, we're a great team. We've done great work together over the last 2 years. And I'm just so proud to have been your partner and LCI's partner in this most important cause. You know, it's a remarkable privilege to have friends like you, Mario, and like Latino Coalition for Israel, when the chips were down and we needed to really spring to action, you were there, and you were there every time. When there was a BDS legislation passing in Chile, you organized, LCI and you, Mario, organized an online conference with great Christian leaders in Chile, where we talked about what it means to stand with Israel and to support Israel and to fight this eternal scourge of anti-Semitism. And in so doing, energized an important and growing population in that country to advocate for the right policies for their country. We then did the same thing in Colombia, again, organized by you. And I know that we have great things planned for the future. You know, this actually Zoom today was planned while I was envoy. I was in office when we discussed this and began scheduling it. And so I can truly say that it was a special honor to work with you over the last 2 years. And it's such a great privilege to continue this partnership, which this Zoom today certainly represents. So thank you for everything you do, and thank you for having me. I was appointed just over 2 years ago to lead America's fight against this tireless human sickness that recurs generation after generation throughout the world. That human sickness is anti-Semitism, Jew hatred. And I'm often asked, why is it that the United States has an envoy devoted to this? I mean, after all, there's all kinds of evil in the world. There are all kinds of human sicknesses. There are all kinds of hatreds, racism, and other kinds of hatreds. Why do we have a special focus on this? Not to the exclusion of any of the others, but why do we devote unique focus to this particular hatred? Now, you on this call, more than anyone else, know the answer to that question. Anti-Semitism is unique among all the hatreds of the world in its ubiquity, in its longevity, as we've seen throughout history, throughout the generations. Mario mentioned, you know, we're shortly going to be, so the Jewish people are shortly going to be commemorating Purim. Purim, thousands of years ago, a holiday that exists to commemorate the fight against anti-Semitism, the defeat of the first attempt to commit genocide, actual genocide. This is not, we're not talking about the anti-Semitism of discrimination. We're talking about actual genocide against the Jewish people. So anti-Semitism is unique in its ubiquity. It's unique in its longevity throughout the generations. And it's also unique in its destructive power. You see, anti-Semitism is never only about the Jews and harming Jews. That's the first target. But what is pernicious about anti-Semitism is that it is so destructive. And every society that has embraced this vile hatred has been destroyed by it. Look at the movements over the past century that have defined themselves through anti-Semitism, where Jew hatred wasn't ancillary or a footnote to the ideology, but a central core defining feature of it. Look at the damage that those movements brought to the world, to civilization. Well, we can begin by Nazism. Not only murdered 6 million Jews, but destroyed a continent, left a large part of the world ruined in its wake. Fast forward to the present. What are the movements today that define themselves through anti-Semitism? Well, the Islamic Republic of Iran, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah. These are movements, entities, states that represent an existential threat not only to the Jewish people, but a threat to peace and stability and safety in the world, a threat to American values, a threat to the safety of Europeans. And so truly, when we stand up shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, as we must do, to fight anti-Semitism, we are fighting. We are fighting for our countries. We are fighting for our collective future, and that better, more just future that we seek to bequeath to our children and grandchildren. That's why I'm so proud to be working with the Latino Coalition for Israel in making our world a better place. Now let's talk about rising anti-Semitism. We've seen anti-Semitism rise now over the past decade or two, perhaps more. And we're seeing it rise from the far right, the ethnic supremacist haters who really hate everyone unlike themselves, but always Jews most of all. We're seeing anti-Semitism rise on the radical left. These are the Jew haters who disguise their anti-Semitism as anti-Zionism, denial of Jewish peoplehood, hatred of the Jewish state. And let me be clear, hatred of the Jewish state is hatred of the Jewish people, plain and simple. We're also seeing anti-Semitism rise from militant Islam, the chief source of violence against the Jews of Western Europe. So let me talk a little bit about what the United States has done about this disgraceful rise in anti-Semitism over the past decade or 2 decades. And I'll talk about what we did over the past 2 years as I served as United States Special Envoy. Well, first of all, as Mario mentioned in the introduction, we negotiated groundbreaking agreements with foreign entities in the Arab world, because what happens in the Arab world doesn't stay in the Arab world. What happens in the Arab world affects the European street and the US college campus. We negotiated one such agreement with the Kingdom of Bahrain, specifically the King Hamad Global Center on Peaceful Coexistence, His Majesty the King's personal arm for coexistence and tolerance. An MOU, imagine, an MOU between the United States Department of State and an Arab entity to fight anti-Semitism together, to develop curricula for children throughout the Middle East to teach not only tolerance, but true affection for each other, interethnic and interfaith, and to fight all forms of anti-Semitism. And here's what's so significant. The MOU says we will fight together, quote, all forms of anti-Semitism, including anti-Zionism and the delegitimization of the State of Israel. First time an Arab entity has ever agreed to language like that. We signed another MOU with the Kingdom of Morocco's Mimouna Association to do the same thing, to fight all forms of anti-Semitism, including anti-Zionism and the delegitimization of the State of Israel. And so we negotiated groundbreaking agreements. We convened the first ever US government-sponsored conference on combating online anti-Semitism. And let me tell you why that's so important. You know why anti-Semitism has been rising for 10 or 20 years now? The rise in anti-Semitism tracks almost precisely the increased influence and presence of the internet and social media in our lives. That is one of the great engines driving this rise in anti-Semitism. Think about it. In the old days, a hater would have to organize, would have to do work, rallies, meetings. Today, a hater can sit in a darkened room in a basement in some part of the world and with the click of a mouse, drive that vile, hate-filled venom across the world with global reach and unprecedented speed to reach tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of followers. The social media does so much good in the world. The internet is so important to us. But let's be honest, it is the chief vector of so many of our social ills, and anti-Semitism is exhibit A. It is the reason for the rise in anti-Semitism. And so we've got to address online hate, while at the same time, of course, never, God forbid, never, trampling on America's free speech values, on the First Amendment. And so this conference, which was historic, addressed precisely this point. How can we organize and work together to counter online hate while at the same time championing, embracing, upholding America's free speech values? Another thing we did is dramatically increase the global consensus on the definition of anti-Semitism, because, I know as a military officer, if you want to effectively confront a threat, you have to know the threat. You have to know your enemy. You've got to define it. Well, we have a vehicle for defining anti-Semitism. It's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, or IRA, the IRA definition. And it is a very good definition. Under my 2 years as special envoy, more and more countries throughout the world adopted the IRA definition, including Muslim majority countries. Kosovo by executive action, Albania by formal parliamentary action. President Macron announced his adoption of IRA. Even the UK Labour Party, with a great deal of fighting and internecine conflict, but eventually even the UK Labour Party adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And then in those agreements we negotiated, with Bahrain's King Hamad Center and the Kingdom of Morocco's Mimouna Association, those MOUs also adopt the IHRA definition. I'm proud to say that the State Department has been using that definition for years. And a year ago, last December, the year before last December, the President of the United States, by executive order, adopted the IHRA definition for the interagency, for the entire federal government. And so we dramatically increased the global consensus on the definition of anti-Semitism, which definition not only encompasses old, traditional, medieval forms of anti-Semitism, but also captures in its definition anti-Zionism, Israel hatred, denial of Jewish peoplehood, targeting of the state of Israel. And so the IHRA definition is so important, and it has gained ground all over the world thanks to strong US leadership. Hate crimes. As a former criminal prosecutor, I know that it is so important that law enforcement organizations stand up and say that a crime committed with hate as a motive is worse, is more morally blameworthy, should be more severely punished than a crime committed without those motives. And so we focus the attention of law enforcement leaders across international jurisdictions, here at home in the United States, in other countries in Europe. I met with law enforcement leaders from 7 separate German states to focus on best practices for prosecuting hate crimes, for investigating them, and for appropriately punishing those vile anti-Semitic hate crimes. We drove new policies, really historic new policies, touchstone policies, transformative policies in the areas of anti-Zionism and anti-Israel discrimination. When my boss, Secretary Pompeo, stood before 18,000 activists at the AIPAC Policy Conference and declared, quote, "Let me go on the record, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism." When Secretary Pompeo stood next to Prime Minister Netanyahu in the eternal and undivided capital of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, Jerusalem, and said, "We are announcing a new policy. The global campaign to boycott, sanction Israel, boycott, sanction, and divest from Israel, the BDS campaign, is a manifestation of anti-Semitism. First time ever the United States has officially declared that BDS is anti-Semitism and campus anti-Semitism." Pastor Bramnick mentioned it in the introduction. The campuses, the college campuses in the United States and in other parts of the world are so often the front lines in this battle. As Jewish students are discriminated against and harassed, and as students of all stripes are indoctrinated against Judeo-Christian values, certainly against Jews and against Israel, but against Judeo-Christian values on which our civilizations have been based. Well, the President of the United States a year and a few months ago issued an executive order that basically said enough is enough. We are no longer going to stand idly by and watch the persecution of Jewish students on US college campuses. So he said Title VI civil rights protections to Jewish students on college campuses. And I'll tell you, I've watched those complaints against universities go up because students now are empowered to take their case to a forum that will hear them out. Because no American should feel unsafe when they're proud of their heritage and willing to stand up for what they believe to be right. No American. And so that's what we've done. Another thing, we have launched philo-Semitism initiatives in multiple countries throughout the world, including right here at home. You see, think about it. You can defend against the onslaught of anti-Semitism, and you have to. It is an onslaught, and you have to defend against it. But can you ever win a war when all you do is play defense? Can you even win a football game if all you do is play defense? You've got to go on the offense. How do you go on the offense against Jew hatred? Well, you in the Christian community know so well, anti-Semitism is an issue of values. It's above all, a spiritual sickness. How do you go on the offense against that? How do you proactively combat that? Through education and through a narrative that is philo-Semitic, that teaches, that educates, that inculcates respect for, an appreciation of, an understanding of the Jewish story, the biblical story of the Israelites traveling through the desert on their way to the promised land that influenced and inspired the founding of our country. Those Jewish values like B'Tselem Elohim, that every human soul is infinitely precious, created in the image of God, and therefore endowed with limitless potential, and therefore enjoying fundamental, unalienable rights, including life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Those principles in the US Declaration of Independence flow directly from those Jewish values. Why don't we educate? Why don't we talk about it? Why don't we take seriously Jewish American Heritage Month? Yes, there is one. You probably don't know about it, but it exists. Why don't we proactively drive a narrative that teaches those values and breeds that affection for the Jewish story? Boy, let me tell you, that's not only fighting anti-Semitism, but that's recapturing and rediscovering America and American values. It's also rediscovering the values of so many countries around the world, including those of you listening, at a time when, as we know all too well, those values are under assault everywhere we look. And so here again, we see that the fight against Jew hatred is part and parcel of the fight for our collective values, the values of our countries, the values of our civilization. That's why I was so very proud to lead America's fight against this scourge. And I'm so very proud now to continue this work together with amazing organizations, impactful, transformative organizations like the Latino Coalition for Israel. You know, this coming Shabbat, in only a few days, Jews around the world will read a certain Torah portion, in addition to the regular weekly Torah portion. It is always read on the Shabbat before Purim. The Shabbat is called Shabbat Zachor, Shabbat of memory, because this Torah portion that's read begins with the word Zachor, remember. It's actually a chilling injunction. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech b'tzetchem miMitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way of your exodus from Egypt. And then it goes on, and at the end it says, do not forget. Remember, do not forget. It pounds the table. It's an urgent command throughout the ages, and it raises the obvious question. Why? What's so special about Amalek? I mean, after all, there have been other Jew haters throughout the world. What about Egypt? I mean, what about the Pharaoh who drowned babies in the Nile? I mean, you can't get worse than that. Why Amalek? What is so special about this kind of anti-Semite? Well, the same Torah portion tells us, because after it says Zachor, remember, it talks about what Amalek did. Asher darcha becha, vayzanev becha. He attacked you from behind. He ambushed you from the rear and cut down your weak and your stragglers. Hanichlashim, you're weak. And then it goes on to say, and you were tired and you were weary. You see, that is the danger of this eternal enemy of the Jewish people, Amalek. The danger of Amalek is that it preys upon our weakness, upon our confusion, upon our indecision. And so it cuts down who? The stragglers. And you were what? You were weak and tired. It doesn't mean physically tired. It means spiritually tired, worn down, unwilling to stand up and be courageous. That's the danger. So why remember? Why Zachor? Remember throughout the ages? Because it says when you're weak, that's when Amalek can pray. You want to really fight Jew hatred? You want to really fight this eternal enemy? You have to be strong internally. And in case any of this is lost, there's another powerful example. The word Amalek, the name of that eternally anti-Semitic nation, in Gematria, the spiritual Kabbalistic numbering system, the word Amalek is equal in value to another Hebrew word, safek, doubt. Amalek preys upon doubt, our doubt. Doubt in our justness, doubt in God, doubt in the rightness of our cause, doubt in our ability to surmount the obstacles in our way. That's what Amalek represents. And that's why it's so urgent that we work together. Thank God, in Latino Coalition for Israel, and with leaders like Pastor Bramnick, we don't see doubt. We don't see moral confusion. We don't see weakness and weariness. We see strength. We see courage. We see justice. We see, yes, godliness, a commitment to leading humanity's inexorable march toward godliness and decency and justice. And in that great cause, I could be no more proud to be your partner, your friend, your battle buddy. May you go from strength to strength. And I look forward to doing great work together. Thank you for having me.
Elan, we thank you so much for sharing, and especially the times we've been together, the spiritual perspective. This really is a time that the enemy's coming into all of us, even in the Christian world, with great doubt.
Yeah.
And that we really needed what you had shared in the exhortation. I just want to bring up a couple things and get your input on it. Christian and Jewish communities have been uniting for years in their support of Israel. I know you mentioned education. What other ways can we maximize the alliance that we've seen on the pro-Israel move to now focus as well on this global rise of anti-Semitism?
Well, you know, there are so many things to do, so many fires to put out, you know, so many situations to which to react, but also so many avenues of proactive conduct. But I want to focus on a point you raised in your question just now, and that is education. We cannot win this without driving that philo-Semitic narrative, without educating our children. You know, look, I will tell you that what's happening on campuses is having an effect. A recent survey of Jewish students showed that, but by a very reputable pollster, showed that Jewish students are becoming less supportive of Israel. The chief crisis in the evangelical Christian community, you know this, I mean, is that, well, we're losing the young people. A pastor said to me in DC, I was convening a conference in DC, and a pastor said to me, let me tell you what's going on in our community. We raise our kids to be pro-Israel as a matter of faith. For us, it's theology. Then we send them away to college and they become changed. Now, look, I'm a fan of higher education. I'm not suggesting people shouldn't go to college. You know, I went to a school that sadly was, you know, very, very left and I bet a great school. I'm very proud of it, Cal Berkeley. I mean, I had a great experience. But if we don't prepare our children for what they're going to get in these schools, the tsunami of indoctrination against, you know, these basic values that you know, on which America was built, then we're going to lose the next generation. We lose the next generation. What's left? I mean, evangelical kids and Jewish kids, you lose them. I mean, who's left? Who's left to fight the fight? And so we've got to not only do our job at home, preparing our kids, but we also have got to focus on education, on curricula, on what's being taught, on diversity. You know, diversity is a big, you know, everyone talks diversity, but what we need is diversity of ideas. We need diversity of ideas on campuses. And so this is something all of us as Americans need to unite in and push for, because the results will be far worse even than America's turn away from its philo-Semitism. And America is the most philo-Semitic country in the history of the world. But the results will really be, God forbid, a million times, God forbid, America turning away from America's values. And once we do that, we're lost. And so we've got to focus on this, all of us together.
Thank you so much. A couple of things, and we had a meeting that you were with us almost a year ago to the day, 2 weeks before Purim in Boca Raton with the Jewish and evangelical community, and there were a couple of things that I had laid out in that forum. One is that the Christian leaders need to continue denouncing replacement theology that has been a real thorn on our side for a long time. It's better, but not in all circles, and that's very important. Also acknowledging past Christian persecution of the Jewish people, and then joint action, maybe call for actions for Christians and Jews working together to fight all forms of racism and hatred, including anti-Semitism, standing against boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and potentially dedicating, Purim would be a great time, dedicating a Sunday, maybe next Sunday, around the time of Purim, explaining the tragic history of Christian-Jewish relations and the importance of standing against anti-Semitism and with the Jewish community. One of our colleagues also recommended every church potentially appointing a liaison to the local Jewish community and starting to do joint events like we've been doing, reaching out to pastors and rabbis. We actually, Elan, I probably mentioned to you years ago, started a pastor-rabbi Torah study. One of our pastors locally, John Wooden, is heading that up, where pastors and rabbis sit down once a month and open the Bible and share in areas of commonality and just establishing relationship. So those are just some ideas that the community can undertake.
That's beautiful and so important. And yes, I mean, it's about relationships. It's also about acknowledging what went on in the past, which, by the way, is no obstacle at all to relationships in the present and future. I mean, Israel and Germany are great, great close allies. And in fact, one of the most philo-Semitic, leaders in Germany is the minister president, basically the governor, as we would say in the United States, of Bavaria, Markus Söder, who is just a tremendous opponent of anti-Semitism and a great philo-Semitic leader. And so, it goes to show you that these relationships can be built regardless of history. And we've got to do that. And thank God, I mean, the relations between the Jewish community and the evangelical Christian community in the United States and the growing evangelical Christian community in Latin America, a growing community that is remarkable in its efficacy and its values and its advocacy for values, and in its philo-Semitism. It's just so important.
Thank you so much. Just to let you and the viewers know, we have participants from Colombia, Panama, Guatemala, Kenya, Uganda, as well as throughout the United States. We appreciate everyone joining us. Elan, thank you so much for your time, for our friendship. Thank you for the absolutely historic accomplishments that you, under President Trump's administration, were able to accomplish. We're still in awe of what happened with Bahrain, with the Abrahamic Accords, and then the Memorandum of Understanding that Arab nations, I mean, you got to sit down and think about this, are helping in the fight against and wanting to take a lead in this against anti-Semitism in Morocco. And any last comments on that historic?
Well, I was at the White House. I'll tell you an amazing story. I was at the White House when the Abraham Accords were signed, and one of the senior delegates from one of the countries, I don't want to say which one because it was a private conversation, but he ran up to me and he was exuberant. And he said to me, "Don't think this will be a cold peace. This will not be a cold peace. We will do great things together." I have to tell you, I got choked up. I mean, you have to pinch yourself that these are Arab leaders who are thrilled to be embracing the Jewish people, Jewish history in the Middle East, and the state of Israel. And this is really just a breathtaking moment. And it is my prayer that, none of this should be partisan. And it's my prayer that the new administration will double down, because why would anybody turn away from a track record like that, from a legacy like that? I mean, that's, this is a gift to the world what we were able to do. And I want to publicly thank the incredible peace team, of course, the president, but the peace team, and of course, my boss, Secretary Pompeo, but Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz and David Friedman and Brian Hook, who just, I mean, the remarkable negotiating skill, the breathtaking diplomacy, and the achievements, the historic biblical achievements that the president's peace team were able to see is just, we have to say a blessing and really thank God that we were witness to such things, and may it continue.
Elan, thank you so much. We just want to close in prayer. Father, we just thank you for this time. I thank you for Elan and his work. And as I mentioned to him before, that his work is just beginning as you use him mightily to go forth and continue in this work. And Father, we do thank you for the historic accomplishments during the last 4 years of the administration. We thank you for the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem, for the Abrahamic Accords. And Father, we do pray for the protection of the Jewish people in America and throughout the world, that you would raise a mighty supporting army with the Christian world, Father. Just bless those that were with us today and those that will watch the broadcast in the future. In Jesus' name, amen. We will be posting the recording of this event on Facebook. Please feel free to share it. This afternoon, we'll have it on Latino Coalition for Israel, LCI.global, or Mario Bramnick Facebook. God bless you all. Elan, thank you again so much.